I'm going to tell you about something that the Trump administration is doing right now that almost no one is talking about. It involves billions of dollars in health funding that comes with strings attached. It involves access to data. It involves access to natural resources. And we're going to talk about why Kenya's high court just said fuck no to this. But before we get into it, I want to hear from you. What is one word that describes how you feel about the Trump administration right now? Drop it in the comments because I'm going to check in with you later on this at the end of the video. Hey everyone, it's Eve. If you're new here, welcome to the show where we talk about everything having to do with women in America through a public health lens. And if you've been here before, you know that we don't sugarcoat this shit. So let's get into it. Now, why does it matter to women in America what Trump is doing to African countries? I will tell you, it's because our tax dollars are funding this oppression. Women in America can't be free while our government strips rights from women worldwide. Their playbook abroad is their blueprint for what they're doing to us here at home. And our liberation is all interconnected. So while we are drowning in domestic chaos, Americans are missing the fact that since December of 2025, the U.S. has signed bilateral agreements with 15 African countries. Now, that's just a fancy word for deals between two governments. And these agreements total over $11 billion. So countries can get funding for HIV programs, malaria prevention, and tuberculosis, but with major conditions attached. So before I explain what those conditions are, you need to understand what's really driving Trump's sudden interest in health aid, because we sure as shit know that it's not to help people. Access to Africa's natural resources is critical to Republican power strategy on the world stage. So African countries hold minerals that are important for technology. They have cobalt, they have lithium. These are the things that your iPhones, your laptops, and our military technology are made of. So Trump has explicitly linked these health agreements with US mining agreements. In Zambia, for example, the government delayed signing a health deal until the country signed a mining collaboration agreement. This approach is so predatory by design. So in early 2025, Republicans gutted USAID, which is the U.S. Agency for International Development, and it was the largest donor of health funds in the world. And then they exploited the desperation that they created. So countries that relied on USAID funding for HIV programming, for malaria prevention and maternal health, they now face a choice. They have to either accept these new bilateral agreements or watch their people die from lack of health care. Because organizations that are providing life-saving HIV treatment had their staff gutted by as much as 90% overnight with no warning and no phase out when USAID was dismantled. The funding just stopped. And now these bilateral agreements are being pushed to countries that heavily relied on that aid that was so abruptly taken away from them. The agreements grant extensive access to national health systems and data. They do way more than just disease surveillance, tracking outbreaks like COVID or Ebola. They grant the US government direct access to nearly every part of a country's health system. So this is patient records, disease tracking, medicine inventories, lab results, pharmacy data. Countries have to hand over biological samples like blood or tissue. They have to share genetic data on diseases that could cause epidemics within days of a US request. And these agreements can last up to 25 years for data and pathogen sharing, extending 10 years beyond termination of the main agreement. These U.S. agreements provide no guarantees that countries will receive any of the medical products that were developed from using their data. So if the U.S. uses Kenya's data to develop a vaccine, Kenya has no guarantee that they'll actually ever get that vaccine to use with their own people. Here's what the US government could do, though, with that data. They could develop vaccines and treatments without guaranteeing access to other countries. They can control who gets the vaccines, the medications, and the medical supplies worldwide, leaving countries dependent on foreign timelines. And this undermines national sovereignty, so a country's right to govern itself, because it shifts health policy control away from local governments and to the United States. It exposes sensitive health data that could potentially create surveillance pathways for the US. Now, to be clear, HIV, malaria, tuberculosis, and polio are major health priorities that the government is offering to fund. But the problem isn't funding the surveillance of these diseases. The problem is the scale of access being demanded and the lack of anything fair in return. So despite State Department claims of more than $8 billion, these deals actually represent massive cuts to what the countries they're negotiating with previously had through USAID. Kenya faces a 28% cut. Mozambique and Liberia would see reductions of 39% and 63%. That is extortion. So why should you care about health agreements in Africa? Okay, first, fairness. You cannot promote democracy here at home while using aid to strip nations of control over their own health systems. Second, pandemic preparedness. So public health cooperation only works when data is shared with trust and fair benefit for everyone. If powerful governments privilege their own interests, lower income countries will hold back crucial outbreak information, and that makes the next pandemic deadlier for literally everyone. Third is that data is power. So when data flows out of countries under unequal terms, future vaccines and treatments will benefit wealthy nations first and not the countries that provided the data. But here's where it gets good. Kenya is showing us what resilience looks like. In December of 2025, Kenya signed one of these U.S. health agreements worth $2.5 billion over 5 years to support HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, maternal and child health, and disease surveillance. All good things. But civil society in Kenya, that means the citizen groups like nonprofits and advocacy organizations, said no, because organizations like the Consumer Federation of Kenya filed legal challenges arguing that the agreement violates Kenya's Data Protection Digital Health Act and the digital health regulations. So in December of 2025, Kenya's High Court suspended the data sharing components of these agreements until constitutional and privacy concerns could be heard. The case is set for February, and the court blocked any transfer or sharing of medical data or sensitive personal health information. And it's not just Kenya. More than 50 African and global organizations have called on governments to demand fair terms. So groups like the People's Health Movement Kenya, the Resilience Action Network Africa, and Public Citizen, they are demanding 3 things. 1, if you use our data to make vaccines, we get those vaccines. 2, no more backroom deals. Everything is transparent. You have to include civil society. And 3, protect our national data systems from US control. So Public Citizen argues these deals force countries to trade their power and dignity for less support than Trump took away earlier this year through USAID. Now here's the bottom line. Trump is doing massive damage to African nations under the cover of aid. Republicans engineered a global health funding crisis that exploited the desperation to demand what they wanted all along, which was control over data, control over resources, and sovereignty. So history is repeating itself. We're back to colonialism, just with different paperwork. And Kenya is showing us what resistance looks like. Civil society organizations filing legal challenges, courts blocking the implementation of these agreements, and citizens demanding their government protect constitutional rights over US dollars. That is the model. So, what can you do to help with this? You can share this video, especially with anyone who's working global health or international development. You can follow the African organizations pushing back that I mentioned. They're here on the screen. You can call your representative about this nonsense. They need to hear from you. The number is in the description. Tell them to oppose these predatory deals because the fight for reproductive justice, health autonomy, and democratic accountability are global. When something happens in Nairobi, it matters in Nashville. So we need to never forget that. If this connected dots you hadn't seen before, hit that like button and subscribe because we're doing this work every week, connecting reproductive justice to systems of power that impact us all. Now drop a comment. Did you know about these bilateral health agreements? How does it make you feel about the Trump administration now? If you want to support this work, subscribe to us here at Women in America on YouTube. I'll see you next week.